You have likely heard of APA, MLA, and Chicago-style citations before. These are really languages for helping us to report information. So we are going to use APA this semester, and this presentation walks you through a couple of standards that we expect throughout all of your speeches for the rest of the semester. APA stands for the American Psychology Association. This group has put together a set of standards for helping us to report information. This is important for a couple of reasons. First, it helps us to give credit to other people who have gone before us and helped us to learn everything that we know today. Second, it helps us to avoid plagiarism, as we'll talk about. That is a very problematic thing to plagiarize within our speeches. So APA helps us make sure that we are avoiding that. And then finally, it helps us to build our own credibility as speakers. According to Dr. Lucas, plagiarism is any time we take another person's language or their thoughts or ideas and make other people believe that they are our own. Plagiarism is problematic, one, because we're stealing another person's information, but two, it takes away our ability to add our voices to the conversation. Keep in mind that as we give speeches, we're not talking in a vacuum. We're joining a larger conversation. Many people have talked about these issues before us. Many people will talk about them after us. We want to make sure that we are joining this conversation well. And if you walk into any conversation with your friends and all you do is copy what the other people are saying, nobody's going to want you to join their conversations. So we need to learn how to work in what other people have already said and then give them credit while also then making our own claims that are important. So one thing I want to point out here is the difference between patchwork and wholesale plagiarism. Wholesale plagiarism, an example of that would be if I went and took somebody else's speech, the entire speech, and I pretended like it was my speech and I simply gave somebody else's speech. Obviously that's problematic. Most people know that that's wrong. But what a lot of students don't know is patchwork plagiarism is also problematic. That's when I take part of one speech and part of somebody else's speech and part of this speech and I put them all together to create my own speech. This is still problematic because I'm copying information from other people and I'm still going to lose points for that. I'm also, as I do that, I'm losing my ability to get my voice out there. Now, we do want to use information that's already out there to build our speeches, but in order to avoid plagiarizing, we need to give them credit. So for each speech that you have this semester, and for every time you cite information that's not your own, that information needs to be cited in 4 different places. First, it needs to be cited in text, so in your outline. Second, it needs to be cited in a reference list. So at the bottom of your outline, you'll have a list of all of your references. It needs to be cited verbally, out loud while you're talking. You need to tell your audience where you got the information. And then if you are using a PowerPoint slide, you should, or any images that aren't yours, you should have citations on there as well. The basic rule is if I'm using information that is not my own thought, my audience needs to know very clearly where I got that information from. Let's talk then about these oral citations. Oral citations are meant to help your audience know a couple of things. First, you want your audience to know why the information matters, if it's credible, and how it helps build your argument. Second, you need to give your audience enough information in the oral citation so that if they decide they want to go and look up that source themselves, they know how to do so. In your reference list, which is at the bottom of your outline that you're going to be turning in, the physical paper you're turning in, you're going to have a reference list that has all the details about every citation. When you're talking orally, you don't need to give us every single bit of that information. Instead, you need to give us enough information orally that when we want to, we can go and find your longer citation at the reference list, and then we can look up your source. So here are some general things that we typically say in an oral citation. Often we would like to know this type of source, the author or the sponsoring organization, maybe the title or a brief description, and the date of publication. As long as I know those things, if you tell me, for example, that you are citing a 2023 Harvard study in your speech, one that tells me it's recent, so I know it's probably credible, I can tell where it's come from, but also knowing Harvard and knowing 2023, I can go to your reference list and I can get all the other information that I need. So it's important for you to have a good reference list so that your oral citations can be a little bit more vague, but you want your oral citations to be good enough that your audience knows the information is credible and they know how to find it later on. Here are just a couple of examples. I encourage you to pause the video, walk through these so that you can see different ways that you can cite information orally. You also need to cite all of your sources in your text. So this is in the body of your speech, in your outline that you're going to be turning in. Again, any piece of information that is not your own, so if it's not your own thought, any piece of information should have an in-text citation connected to it. So every sentence that it has information that you got from somewhere else should have in-text citation. Now, if it's general knowledge, you don't need to cite it, or if it's information that's your own, then you don't need to have an in-text citation. Otherwise, you need an in-text citation. In-text citations need at least two things. First, they need to include the author's last name. Second, they need to include the date, or at least the year of publication. Then third, if you are doing a direct quotation, then you need to include the page number that quote came from. Now, I encourage you not to do very many direct quotations, especially in a speech as short as 3 minutes or even 8 minutes or 10 minutes. You don't want to give that time up to somebody else's voice. So instead, paraphrase into your own words. If you do need to use a quotation, I encourage you to keep it short, probably less than 15 seconds worth of your time. Again, here's a couple of examples of how you might use in-text citations. Pause the video, walk through the different ways that you can cite something in your text of your speech. The rest of this slideshow simply walks through what an outline looks like according to APA guidelines. Take a minute, walk through each of these slides, see what the title page looks like, see what the introduction looks like, what the main points look like. Just see generally how they organize information. Again, these should all look very consistent across speeches and across students so that the readers know where to find the information.